Introduction. This is a compilation of literary references and personal musings on magic, shamanism, sorcery, and creativity, selected by their applicability to the creative process, in order to arrive at a synchronous understanding of how art making can be magical, even divine in essence. My aim is for these concepts to be mirrored into the reader's creative practice, with discernment and parabolic reading to all words. I write as a voice in your head which brings offerings in consensual form, a concept from Tales of Power by Carlos Castaneda for the subjectivity of perceptions. Everything appears to us in a form relative to our subjective ability to comprehend it. If you are a-religious, you can think of the associations to the divine in this text through the lens of associative healing, as outlined by social scientist Jerome Frank. Methods of primitive healing involve an interplay between patient/healer group and the supernatural. This serves to raise the patient's expectancy of cure, help him harmonize his inner conflicts, reintegrate him with his group and his spirit world, supply a conceptual framework to aid this, and stir him emotionally. These notions are meant to loosen your creative authority on yourself, to allow yourself to flow in a way that is natural to you, and fully trust that energetic exchange over time until a relationship is built. Section 1. Depictions of spiritual experiences in art. As a result of industrialization and modernity, religious skepticism spread justifiably and exponentially with each successive generation. Today, we no longer look to the church to provide governance, secularism barring it from doing so. Many of us don't look to the church for much more than the aesthetic pleasure which the building itself provides. The best example of this would be the tourism around the Sagrada Familia. It can be argued that the modern human has been plunged and excavated of the potential for direct spiritual experiences of the like which inspired the holy paintings of the Renaissance period. Nihilism, realism. It can be argued that the modern human has been plunged and excavated of the curious reverie for the natural world which inspired the Romanticists. It can also be argued that we have been demystified to the phenomenology of subjective interpretation which inspired the Impressionists. The curse of postmodernism is that it leaves us to sort through the rubble of the past and the dust of the present for shards of meaning which aligns with our subjective sense of self. A future is not seen nor felt, and this void is becoming increasingly recognized in our social consciousness. Individuals have been called back to psychism and metaphysics after finding nothing is realer than that which can be experienced directly in the mind. Direct experience has become increasingly valuable as consciousness seeks to free itself from the binds of being the means of production and the cruel subject to algorithms which seek to drain us of the natural impulses which make us go outside and talk to people, or ourselves, through triggering and pacifying on loop. Hilda Afklint, the visionary Swedish painter, worked with visions gathered from group channeling sessions in a group of 5 women. Wassily Kandinsky imbued paintings with music, living his life in hopes of achieving the perfect spiritual composition. Leonora Carrington's work was produced in trance states, and the paintings were often means of spiritual communication or communion. Same can be said of Remedios Varos. Roberto Mata's paintings sought to depict the quantum, inspired by the advent of nuclear physics in the late 20th century. Section 2. Art making in general. The artist's studio, wherever the work is made, is a magical space. It is the physical nexus of the imagination, where creative imagination, at any level of rendering, is birthed into reality as an artwork through the labor of the artist. The labor itself is fully occupying. Physically and mentally, our materials and mediums provide us with a stimulation known as jouissance, complete stimulation and unfaltering focus. The artist spends days imagining and pondering creative decisions, weighing colors in our created space. Every work of art is initially born in mind, whether as untranslated intention, monologue, or visually through imagination or dreams. And the work that follows is devoted to a perfect realization of this intention, a subtle worship. One becomes selfless through the working of art. In The Creative Brain, Nancy Andreassen describes a state of creation based on first-hand accounts from the diaries of historical figures in art, music, science, etc., and mirrors the visionary nature of creativity to the shamans journeying into other worlds. In order to create, many creative people slip into a state of intense concentration and focus in psychiatric terms. This could be described as a dissociative state. That is, the person in a sense mentally separates himself from his surroundings and metaphorically goes to another place. In ordinary language, the person might be said to be no longer in touch with reality in a subjective sense. However, the creative individual is moving into another reality that is actually more real, although the person appears conscious, but lost in thought. This reality is similar to an unconscious state, a place where words, thoughts, and ideas float freely, collide, and ultimately coalesce. This experience of disengagement, intense focus, or being in another place is probably somewhat analogous to the altered states described by the great mystics. When channeling, the dawning of a magical personality is suggested, akin to the mystic or creative state, where one acts in complete faith that what they are doing is real. But the magical personality, like a cloak, must come off, and we must return to society. The studio is a place where the work is born, and it lives in the world as an object or otherwise happening. It hopes to impress itself upon our social memory through distribution or exhibitions. Art as an anchor for our consciousness is to travel to a space which is depicted, rational or not, which has been made perceptible through a particular artist process. Like the shaman, the work of the artist can be said to be only externally recognized to the degree it fulfills its social purpose. So if the mind creates internal landscapes based on our felt symptoms, we can undergo the work of materializing these landscapes to acquire greater knowledge or catharsis. This must mean that we can also imagine symptoms we do want to experience, which would result naturally from a healed state. Thus, as imagination creates corresponding internal landscapes based off of our visualizations, we can begin the process of making an artwork which mirrors them in our reality as a sigil. This is an integration of the reality creation concept sought by Neville Goddard as read parabolically from the Bible. Artists can embody an imagined state, or the memory of an artist who they are particularly inspired by. In fact, the concept of channel is useful to explain the entry of a person into a dimension that is parallel to the sensible reality, in which a subject would acquire the art skills/abilities or receive instructions about the use of the conventional techniques of artistic representation that the subject apparently is not aware of having on a conscious level. But the magical personality, like a cloak, must come off, and we must return to society. Again, the shaman's mastery comes from a capacity for discernment between these two realms. The energy evoked by the magical personality will always be there for recall by the conscious mind, so that the intention within the sigil can remain at the forefront of perception. This can help one with efforts to help themselves over time. Sigil for states of love, sobriety, joy, to remind us where we must always come back to. Within the studio, the artist can take on the role of the shaman as healer, who sees and diagnoses ailments within our society, making artworks which make light of or subvert the derealizing insanity of the modern political and economic spheres which dictate our lives with a degree of invisibility which is positively correlated with our privilege. Whether the work seeks to address a purely internal or external world of representation, the two are irreversibly intertwined and will color one another, actively or not. I imagine, therefore I am. A meditation on imagination. Imagination can be the most powerful tool in an artist's world, the most fundamental and differentiating aspect of the human experience. Imagination is formless, containing all essences within, a field of potentiality which we are capable of sensing and affecting with our minds. It is capable of creating alternate worlds instantly. The medium of magic for artists is imagination. The artist externalizes ideas into sensible reality in ways which makes them accessible to others. Art historical is a reproduction of a temporal arrangement of space and object in accordance with a subjective framing of perception. To make magic of art takes unknowable states and makes them reproducible to us in our ordinary conscious states. Imagination exists as a shaman within all of us, a visionary seer capable of traveling into other worlds at a whim, superimposing them over ours, to diagnose or differentiate, capable of effecting change within our bodies and minds. It uses the repetition of the world and rituals of human life to go into dream states. It is capable of seeing everything in its full duality. Most importantly for us artists, it retains the power of translation of imagined content into works which can yield similar effects on others and ourselves in an ordinary state of mind. One can say the world we see is imagined, as the brain makes up what we actually see through a mixture of receptive and predictive processing. Vision goes in through the eyes, but the brain is responsible for creating an image out of the information which it is provided with. Thus reality would be projected out from within all of us, assuming a degree of coherence. Like art, music can also be recalled in imagination with a similar lucidity. When I imagine an apple, I don't need to close my eyes to interact with it fully. To some, namely Plato, my imagined apple is actually realer, because I can imagine it in super realistic detail, and it will never actually be eaten or consumed as it exists in imagination as an ideal. Jacques Lacan in The Crease similarly described his mechanics for human desire as realist when yet unrealized, and his theory of the real postulates that the only objectively real shared human experience is that of untranslatable desire feeling, because the language which our personal and societal narratives are built upon is always relative and fallible. Sanity in this framework is tied to a level of coherence between our perceptions of the world and their attributed meanings in our subjectivity. Lacan attributes schizophrenia to incoherence in this chain of symbolic representation. The role of the artist is to break consensus reality by exhibiting realness. Thus, imagination, working through instant simulation of events and circumstances, reception of ideas from somewhere else, must be distinguished from the inner monologue, which reacts to life, desires, and yearns. The validity of both realms is acknowledged by the shaman, whose mastery derives from his ability to not confuse the two. Imagination, by fault of the nature of the self, is most familiar to us in its function of creating images out of yearnings, which the monologue may or may not be capable of voicing to itself. Even then, in doing so, it traverses through the boundaries of time, backwards into memory, and forwards into one of our infinite universes through imagination, back to a time where a desire was fulfilled, or creating a future scenario which implies its fulfillment. It is an aspect of us which is not bound by time or to flesh. It is neither bound by our personality, and we can easily imagine offshoot versions of ourselves based on what we know about our own essence in relation to our life circumstances. In this way, we can imagine ourselves very easily being any of the one infinite number of humans who have ever lived. All of these qualities reveal godlike essence, the imagination which lies inside us all. We could think of divine intelligence as forever imagining, pondering different expressions of itself, and in doing so instantly manifesting the lives, worlds, and universes in resonance with each thought. Thus we could propose that there is within this creator being an imagination consciousness and an always manifesting life energy, which makes real whatever is imagined with instantaneous effect. As humans, our imagination must bear life energy which is also always manifesting, however doing so through the constraints of time, space, and our own beliefs. We must carry on our work in the world and within us, doing the specific work which is required to bring about the imagined events born from our manifestations, foreknowledges, dream prophecies, etc., into the world. Synchronicities occur when the contents of our monologue or imagination seemingly appear directly before us. No seed grows unwatered in the subconscious mind. Discretions. Sometimes the prospect of returning to the studio fills us with dread. Dread at the prospect of once more taking on the accountability inherent to art, of seeing ourselves as human with a nearly infinite imaginative capability, and calling on the energy and discipline necessary for anchoring a work into reality amidst it. We might label ourselves as creatively blocked from the strikes of inspiration. Strikes of inspiration are always good, but we have better do away with the responsibility for ourselves to be inspired. It is enough responsibility to be human in the world, one with a compulsive need to create things at that. How cruel would inspiration be if it was then also our job to go and find it? The shaman does not think, here spirit enters into matter, but assumes spirit is always in matter, is matter, from the moment of embodiment and creation of itself. Inspiration is always waiting for us to show up and will open itself to us endlessly once it trusts us to show up for it consistently and express it fully to our subjective capabilities. Over time, we can analyze our work and gain a better understanding of how we filter or color this energy, and vice versa. A lot of the time, we might be focused on minimizing our humanity to engage with our inner worlds as productively as possible. Many of the shamanistic rituals which are in imagery and healing are based around conscious deprivation or fasting of some kind, whether from food and water, sociality, daylight, sleep, sexual acts, speech, etc., before rituals, in order to purge the consciousness and be clear mediums. The changes are occasioned by fasting from food, water, salt, by sleep and sensory deprivation, temperature extremes, hyper or hypoventilation, sustained physical activity, and psychoactive substances. Other methods, such as certain styles of meditation and deep relaxation, requiring intense concentration on an object, word, or idea, are also associated with changes in blood chemistry. The popular understanding of shamanism is tied to hallucinogenic drug use. Carlos Castaneda's Tales of Power contained the use of peyote within it when Carlos is still an apprentice to Don Juan. Many may turn to substances in order to experience extrasensory perception. These experiences are valuable in their own right. As history will suggest to us, they have been used for as long as we have existed. Not enough warning can be given to the sheer disillusionment of returning to ordinary reality after a psychedelic experience, and many are not psychologically equipped for such a readjustment, especially not within the confines of a previously held schedule, especially not as an already sensitive artist in the world. Even without psychosis, the possibility for association in the mind of personal creativity with external substances can only rationally increase chances of dependency. It is very important to remember that you are enough and contain within you naturally all that it takes to realize the work that you are destined to do. The human mind-body imagination is the greatest resource of all, and the work of the artist is not to surpass or transcend, but come into alignment with all that arises within and without. The practice of art making, if given enough faith and flexibility, can be a healthy form of active hallucination. We are all free to choose what is real in our work, and the realm of the work in progress is a sort of active hallucination, and that it is always shifting and exists in potentiality before we erase and destroy or highlight and render it accordingly to a finished product which we hold in our imagination. It is an experience of the sublime which, depending on the experience, can proliferate visions, the realization of which may lead to a subtle ecstasy through the success of representation and or the joy of the act itself.